Hi guys, welcome back. If you don't know me, I'm Anna Yudin. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology and an author, and I've had a few requests to speak on the Jay Shetty matter. If you're not familiar, Jay Shetty is kind of like a spiritual guru, author, YouTuber. He's interviewed a lot of big people, including even Michelle Obama. And then about a month ago, there was an article that came out that accused him of a few things, some of which were speaking about mental health issues without qualifications to do so, unsavory business practices, and allegedly lying about his past as a monk. I didn't really want to react to the article because I feel like it made a lot of statements about Jay Shetty's character that I don't feel comfortable speculating about. I don't know him as a person. But then I saw this video from his ex, who is also a mental health professional, where she was kind of discussing the issues she has with Jay Shetty's involvement in mental health issues specifically. And I watched some parts of it and I thought it was interesting. There were some parts that I agreed with, some parts that I disagreed with, also just some thoughts in general that I had about the notion of coaching versus therapy, the notion of monetizing quasi-therapeutic services when you don't have qualifications or credentials in that field. So I want to just kind of use this as a jumping off point to talk about these broader issues at large. My intention is absolutely not to contribute to the onslaught of hate that Jay Shetty is receiving at the moment. I also don't 100% agree with what the person who created this video said. If you want to go check this video out on her channel, I'll put a link to that in the description box. But yeah, let's just have a conversation about these issues basically. So I'm just going to start playing the video and stop it whenever I have something I'd like to mention. And of course, if you have any thoughts of your own, always appreciate it in the comments, because like I said, the point of this is really just to talk about the broader issues at large, and so I do very much want to hear what you guys think about this. Let's get into it.
Hi, I'm Shetty and I work as a psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, trauma specialist in the UK. I'm also the head of a university's mental health service, and I'm currently studying a PhD in psychology. Now, I'm explaining that to you because I believe I have some authority in the area of mental health, and hence the reason why I'm talking about this. So the major portion of this video was actually filmed before the Guardian article came out about Jay Shetty, and this part is after. As a mental health professional in this area for over a decade, having recruited different therapists and mental health practitioners, having trained and studied for years, having read many different sources on psychological material, I know the hard work that it takes to work in this area. I know in my clinical practice, you know, the demand, the complexities of working with different psychological issues, diagnosed and undiagnosed. And I became increasingly concerned because there are a lot of vulnerable people that need support, and a lot of these individuals will reach out to, you know, who they come across online. And hence I found this to be very concerning, that there were a lot of inaccuracies.
Right. I do agree with her. I mean, it certainly takes a lot to become a therapist or to go to grad school for therapy. And so I think it can be frustrating for those of us that took the time and invested years and decades of our lives into this field to see people with far less experience in mental health issues sort of framing themselves as experts in the field and taking people's money in order to help them with their mental health. And I've touched on this topic in the past on my channel, and I've spoken about how I don't think somebody needs to have formal education or training to have insight in a particular area. But one thing that I didn't mention is, while I feel like you don't need to have particular training to provide insight and even, you know, to receive money for that, you know, like you don't need to have a PhD in psychology to write a self-help book or to make videos on YouTube. I do think you do need some sort of credentials once you start actually taking individuals' money. So for me, the way I think about it is, it's okay for you to make a living from talking about these things if you happen to be an insightful person and people are drawn to what you have to say. But where it becomes an issue is when you're taking specific individuals money through things like coaching, and you actually don't have the credentials to speak on those matters. And I've also said that, there are coaches out there that I think actually probably improve people's lives, make an impact in a positive way on their coaching clients. And I have nothing against those people. The issue is that I think there are a lot, possibly the majority of coaches on the interwebs these days that maybe are causing harm because they don't have adequate training in the things that they are coaching people about. Coaching is a very unregulated industry. You can kind of call yourself a coach in whatever you want, and nothing bad can really happen to you, short of somebody suing you. There's no governing body that can act on your client's behalf if you've harmed them in some way. And even some of the coaches that I enjoy, for instance, there's one in particular that I'm thinking about who has some really insightful things to say. And she started a journey, she went to therapy, and she created an account where she talks about the insights that she's learning. And she's, trying to get other parents who are in a similar position to what she was in to sort of heal in the same direction. That's an example of somebody that I think is doing a wonderful thing and is helping people. But when I saw that she also provides coaching services, something about that just didn't quite sit right with me. Admittedly, she's been going through this journey for about a year or so. And to me, it's like, can you really in the course of a year have made such a giant leap in your own personal development in whatever area of your life to confidently say, I know this inside and out enough to provide a service to other people, to coach them to do the same thing? I'm a little skeptical. So, a bit of a tangent that I went on just now. Let's continue with the video.
Information really needs to be looked at even in more detail than what I'm doing myself, because people need to be safeguarded from misinformation and inaccuracies around mental health support. Now, those who struggle with mental health difficulties can be extremely vulnerable at times. And actually, as human beings, we are vulnerable. At any point, we may go through a terrible tragedy in life and struggle immensely psychologically. We're going to need some support. We're going to need some help. And so it's so important that there's correct information out there about mental health support, that the people that are providing this support are qualified, are effective in their work, are trained. Now, I'm not saying that all secular mental health services are perfect, and that there's no flaws in them. But what I am saying is that there are certain schools and certain training pathways that are very, very rigorous. It takes years and hours of training, dedication, personal, in-depth growth and transformation so that somebody can be as professional, as well-informed and safe to work with. It was made quite clear in the Guardian article that the credentials of this person is not accurate, and what's being presented in the school has not been totally accurate either. So I will be covering some other things that weren't in the article, and my opinions here in this video are my opinions based off of my insight and professional perspectives. So let me just make clear what I'm not doing. I'm not stating that Jay hasn't helped millions of people. I do think he has helped millions of people. However, there is a huge difference between posting positive messages online and studying deeply a subject and teaching that subject to others, to have them be qualified enough to go out in the world and work one-on-one with individuals that are potentially vulnerable.
Yeah, doesn't that just summarize exactly what I was saying? I think there's a difference between sharing online things that could help people and working with people one-on-one without credentials.
Born and brought up in the ISKCON community, and Jay came at some point in his teenage years. And yes, there was a relationship, but I'm not coming from that angle, purely coming from the perspective of the mental health profession. And
I think this is an interesting subject because anytime a content creator like her, like myself, decides to react to a real life situation that's happening in the world, like a real person that's been called out for less than ideal behavior, it's a decision that often requires balancing the possible risks and the possible advantages. And something that is very difficult to resist is when you have a personal relationship to the subject matter. So for instance, If I can speak frankly with you guys right now, I know for a fact that some of the videos I've made on my channel were stemming from a place of me getting emotionally activated by the subject matter. And so that heavily influenced my estimation of the advantages versus disadvantages of speaking on that subject. Now, something that I myself have worked on in therapy is just because it's coming from an emotional place doesn't mean there isn't value to it. Arguably, if you have a personal connection to the topic that you're speaking about, you have certain insights, maybe you have deeper levels of insights than people who have no connection to it, than people who don't have maybe emotional ties to the subject matter. When I look back on videos I've made in the past, now in retrospect, I can admit that I was totally emotionally triggered about the subject matter. At the time, I denied it. At the time, I thought, no, this is just a subject that I want to speak on. It's just an injustice that doesn't sit right with me. And it takes time to sort of process, no, of course, there's an emotional connection to the subject matter that plays a role, of course. All this to say that, if Trikaya Psychology has a personal connection to this subject matter, I understand the impulse to say, that's not what's driving this, especially because I know she's probably expecting that's what people are going to say. Oh, you're just a bitter ex-girlfriend. A lot of sexist tropes out there will probably have come her way for this video. It's okay to have a personal connection to a subject matter. It's okay to let your emotions guide your insights. Arguably, that's valuable. It's not something to sort of defend against.
Uphold truthfulness? Can we uphold integrity and honesty to protect our society and to protect our community members? Shetty has claimed that he did behavioural science at Cass University, and for the entire time that he's developed his certification program in coaching, he has claimed this online. He has recently, however, changed this to management science. Now, that is the truth. I was with him actually when he was at university. He did business and management science. And so the fact that he did behavioural science has been a misrepresentation of his background and qualifications.
Case in point, she has a personal connection to the subject matter and she can personally attest to something being an untruth.
Developed a coaching school that is an accredited coaching school via the Association for Coaching. Now, that coaching association, just like every other regulatory body, has a code of conduct, ethical guidelines and things like that that members should be adhering to. And one of those is integrity. And it states here that members will be suitably qualified to work with their chosen client group and honestly represent them, their relevant experience, professional qualifications, memberships and certifications, accreditations to clients, sponsors, stakeholders and fellow practitioners. It also says that members will ensure that no false or misleading claims are made or implied about their professional competence, qualifications, or accreditation in any published promotional material or otherwise. Members will attribute ownership of work, ideas, or materials of others to originators and not claim it as their own. So we can see here that the code of conduct within the Association for Coaching that Shetty's school is accredited and associated with is stating that one should not misrepresent their qualifications in any published material, and they should be honest with everyone who they work with about their qualifications and their credentials. However, the very person who has created the school that is accredited with the Association for Coaching has not done so himself. Now, I have checked whether Jay is actually a certified coach. I was wondering, well, maybe he's done some other coaching qualification, but I can't see this online. Now, it's just not something that's been put online if he does have it. And if he doesn't have it, then that raises other questions as to his qualifications and his ability to teach students into his life coaching school. Ordinarily it would. I have checked his website, Wikipedia, I've checked his LinkedIn and his coaching school websites, and nowhere does it state that Shetty has done a coaching qualification himself and is an accredited coach himself. The only thing that is mentioned about his own credentials as to why he has created his certification school has been his own claims of being in India and having his own meditation experiments and his realizations that's come from that. Now, this raises a few questions for me. One is, these are his claims. Is there anybody who is a non-biased witness that can verify these claims? The second thing is, what exactly has he produced from his realizations? Because the ABCs that he has created out of this claim of him being in India, a lot of them are ideas that have been generated from elsewhere, like being aware, mindfulness, SMART goals, and those things. So it would be really great to really understand exactly what life coaching methods did he produce throughout his sort of monk time in India.
So the questions on screen are, what exactly are these original methods? Can they be verified as 100% original? Are his claims of meditation enough to create a method for coaching? First and third questions, I agree, are important. The second one, I think, if we're being honest, nothing in this day and age is that original. Most of the brand new therapies coming out are repackaged, slightly reconceptualized versions of older, former types of therapy. And, as long as you give credit to those influences into your work, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no such thing as that original of an idea at this point in the game. So I disagree about that second question. I would replace it with, are the influences for this method credited? Because as we know, Jay Shetty hasn't always given credit where credit is due.
And it raised a question to me, which is, well, he hasn't done anything in coaching, mental health, no qualifications, and he hasn't done life coaching, but maybe he doesn't actually do life coaching, or maybe he isn't directly involved in the teaching or the life coaching itself, and he's just the CEO of a company and his own business. However, this is not true.
Question 7. Will I be learning the exact coaching strategy and tools used by Jay Shetty with his coaching clients? The answer is yes. As a Jay Shetty coach, you'll be learning the exact same strategies I use with my clients in my coaching practice.
On his coaching sites, he does actually teach other students. He claims to be teaching 11 modules out of the total modules. Like I said, we've got someone who doesn't have the qualifications that he claimed. He misrepresented his degree, and then he hasn't done or hasn't shown online that he has done life coaching himself, meaning trained in life coaching. He has his own claims that he developed some sort of methodology from his time in India, and has not been adhering to the codes of conduct that his very own school must adhere to be a member of.
Looks like this is an email response to, I'm assuming, her, that says, "Hi, we have checked our records and Jay Shetty is a member of the Association for Coaching, so we are able to follow our complaints procedure to deal with this matter." Okay, so if there is a governing body that he is a part of, then this is a good thing, because, she made a good case for how he misrepresented himself and that was against their code of ethics, and presumably they're going to deal with this issue. The issue, again, is that a lot of coaches online don't belong to any governing body. And so even if you wanted to, do some sort of complaint or investigation against them, there would be nobody to go to.
So the second part of this video is looking at some of the things that Jay has said on his coaching school's website. The first thing he talks about is the definition of a therapist.
A therapist, like a life coach, wants to help their clients move forward. Their objectives and approaches are very different, though. The foundation of therapy is based on the medical model. As such, therapists diagnose and cure a type of dysfunction, such as a therapist identifying schizophrenia or a personality disorder, and help the person recover their normal functions by reducing the symptoms.
Right. So already before I hear her reaction to this, I can tell you that is not accurate in my point of view. Therapists are very heterogeneous in their approaches, meaning one person, might think that it's all about reducing dysfunction, so to speak, reducing symptomatology, helping clients move forward. But not all types do. Some types actually focus on meaning making. Some types focus on having more fulfilling relationships. Some types focus on gaining insight into your past, interpreting your dreams, regulating your emotions, soothing your nervous system. There are a lot of different schools of thought and theories within psychotherapy. And so, anytime people sort of compare coaching to therapy, it doesn't sit right with me because there's no definition of coaching that isn't accounted for in some type of therapy. Maybe there's some type of coaching that I haven't heard of, but pretty much any type of coaching that you can envision, that exists as a form of therapy. And so the person who is qualified to provide that therapy, in my opinion, should be the one to do so, not the life coach that has taken their own approach that might not be empirically validated and established as safe. If we're defining coaching as solving problems, then there's a type of therapy for that. It's called solution-focused therapy. If we're defining coaching as helping you figure out your career, there's a type of therapy for that. It's called career counseling. If we're defining coaching as helping people in their relationships, God, there are a ton of therapies that focus on there. It could be, couples therapy like Gottman. It could be interpersonal therapy, different types of psychodynamic therapy, attachment therapy. You get the point.
It helps a patient return to their cognitive and emotional baseline, or the way they used to feel, think, and act.
Okay, he refers to a therapist being based on the medical model and working with diagnoses. He states that the foundation of therapy is based on the medical model. He states that therapists identify, diagnose, and cure types of dysfunction, such as a therapist will identify disorders like schizophrenia and personality disorders and help them go back to normal functioning. He also uses the word patient instead of client. We have to remember that this person is teaching students to become life coaches, to work with potentially vulnerable individuals. This information, his definition of a therapist, is completely incorrect. It's wrong. It's false. We as therapists do not cure mental health issues. We do not diagnose mental health issues.
That's one of the things that I actually completely disagree with. Maybe it's different in the UK, but in the US, therapists absolutely do diagnose mental health disorders. Even master's level therapists, doesn't have to be a doctoral level therapist. So again, maybe this is a difference in terms of jurisdiction, but here in the US, therapists absolutely do diagnose mental health issues. And even before even getting licensure or graduating, trainees also diagnose mental health disorders under the guidance of their supervisors.
We can sometimes identify possibilities of mental health diagnoses, but we do not diagnose and we do not cure, okay? I think what Jay is actually talking about is a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is based on the medical model. That's the other thing that he's wrong about. A majority of therapists do not work based on the medical model.
Therapists typically operate on the biopsychosocial model, which the bio part is the medical model, but we also tend to prioritize the psychological aspect and the social aspect. Sometimes also there's biopsychosocial spiritual thrown in there as well. We tend to be trained into a more holistic approach where we incorporate medical aspects as well as other aspects. Typically, psychiatrists would be more of the medical model, but again, in the US, therapists do incorporate medical models into their work, also depending on the theory, the type of branch of therapy that they operate under, and we do diagnose.
Psychiatrists, however, do. Psychiatrists work on the medical model. They are able to identify, diagnose mental health disorders. They will use the DSM to provide diagnoses, and they'll provide medication, and they will often, and majority of the times, they will refer their patients to therapy. Okay, and I'll describe what therapy really is in a moment. So he's got that completely incorrect. Therapists are not based on the medical model, although they usually are aware of the medical model. But they're...
Sorry to interrupt, but another point I have on that is that actually therapists do unwillingly use the medical model when we use things like the DSM-5 or the ICD-10. The ICD-10, I believe, is actually based on all disorders that a person could have medically. And so sometimes places sort of force you to diagnose an ICD diagnosis rather than a DSM diagnosis. And when that is the case, that is a good example of therapists using the medical model.
Plenty of therapies out there, from cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'll talk about later, psychodynamic. I'm an integrative psychotherapist, existentialism, there's transactional, there's lots of different types of therapies. It's a bit of a minefield, to be honest. However, his definition here is completely incorrect and misleading. Now, this is somebody who, like I said, is teaching students, and those students are also going to have misinformation, and they are then also going to likely inform their clients, and those clients are likely going to be misinformed about what therapists do.
It is very aggravating when people who aren't actually trained in therapy tell other people what therapy is, because like she said, like I'm saying, there are so many different types of therapy that one definition does not adequately summarize what therapy actually is. There are so many different ways of doing things, so many mechanisms of change, so many different theories on what the issue is, what the solution is, so to speak. Like she said, I agree with her that therapists don't cure.
This can become a potential problem because people may encounter more difficult psychological issues that they might require a different professional for. They might need to see a psychiatrist, they might need to see a therapist. However, with these definitions that Jay is providing, they may not seek out that support, thinking that, well, my issues aren't as severe as schizophrenia, my issues aren't a mental health diagnosis, so I won't go and see a therapist. Now, that could actually harm the individual because they're not accessing the right support when they should be.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned in a previous video, therapy is not just for people that have a diagnosis or a very severe diagnosis. Therapy can be helpful even if you're just struggling and maybe you don't meet criteria for a certain diagnosis.
And also, furthermore, they might stay with the coach, right, thinking that, well, you know, under these definitions, yeah, I do need to continue seeing a coach and not a therapist and not a psychiatrist or, you know, any other form of help that might help them, and they'll stay with that coach, and perhaps that coach isn't the most suitable person for them.
I think sometimes we kind of infantilize people. We kind of act like they can't think for themselves, or they don't know how to see through a scam, or that they're being sort of like pushed or forced or coerced into a certain type of service, and that they can't see for themselves that something's not right for them. I think for the majority of people, if they were to be working with a coach and realize this isn't helping or this isn't what I need, they would probably go seek out a different type of service that they need. The issue is only, you know, if that person has then set them off of seeking help for this issue, then they are never going to get the help that they need.
Words schizophrenia and personality disorders are highly stigmatizing. They are probably the two of the most extreme and most challenging, most difficult mental states to work with in mental health. And
I'm a little confused what she means by stigmatizing. I mean, yes, there is a lot of stigma that goes with these disorders, but the terms schizophrenia and personality disorders themselves are just labels. You know, they're diagnostic labels, are in the DSM, they're in the ICD. Saying that a person has schizophrenia or saying that a person has a personality disorder is not in and of itself stigmatizing. There are certainly people that do a great job of stigmatizing disorders such as these, but it's not naming the label. You know, the label's not like a slur, so to speak. It's just a term to describe a constellation of criteria. So I'm not quite sure what she means by this. Maybe she'll explain.
And the use of these words, I think, are problematic, in my opinion, because, like I said, these two diagnoses are very extreme. It's also more rare to have them. So to associate those two diagnoses with the work that therapists do is very, very misleading, okay? Because these two disorders are not the only two disorders that therapists work with. Also, the association with therapists and this information that Jay's providing, again, could potentially further stigmatize people with those issues, because people will avoid wanting to see a therapist, because if they see a therapist, and therapists are associated with schizophrenia and personality disorders, and therefore this will restrict people in terms of accessing mental health support. Now,
I don't know. I mean, for me personally, I kind of disagree with this. I think it's factual to say therapists sometimes work with schizophrenia and personality disorders, as long as you're not saying they only work with personality disorders and psychosis, because, you know, like she's saying, that's not the only thing that therapists do. That would be a misleading statement, but to my knowledge, that's kind of a misrepresentation of what was actually said. You know, saying therapists work with schizophrenia and personality disorders is not the same as saying therapists only work with personality disorders and schizophrenia. But At the same time, I do understand the point she's making, that, Jay Shetty is saying these things very deliberately, presumably to get more clients for his coaching business who think, well, my issues aren't so severe, so maybe I'll go to a coach instead. Right, it is kind of presented as like, this is, very extreme circumstance in which you need to go over there, and then all these other circumstances you can come to me. I do get that.
Have a huge issue, especially in the Black and ethnic minority community, of underutilization of mental health services. Okay, so this is a big problem. Black and Asian ethnic minority individuals suffer in silence a lot. And there is a huge issue of stigmatization of mental health in general. Therapist is a common term that's thrown about. It's becoming more and more popular. But if this information associates therapists with the most extreme disorders, it could give an even more negative connotation for certain groups on accessing therapeutic support. Again, compounding their reasons to avoid seeking support. Comparing that to what coaches do under Jay's definition makes it more likely that individuals will go to a coach rather than a therapist. I'll read what he says here about coaching. He says, he compares coaching with therapy, and he states that coaches enable and promote change instead of curing. This is not correct. This is not correct. Therapists do not cure. I can guarantee you.
Yeah, therapists have a mechanism of change as well, which, like I said, there are different theories about how that change is brought about, but therapists don't cure, they facilitate change.
That every therapist, every psychologist, and every psychiatrist, will state that they do not provide a cure for mental health issues. My opinion here is that if Jay really did know about mental health, if he really knew about well-being, then he would not have said what he said. He wouldn't have got the definition of therapist wrong, he wouldn't have compared coaching to therapy in this way, and he wouldn't have mentioned anything about cure. Now, psychiatrists can provide medication which can help mood. Therapists massively work with change with clients. They use years of training. It takes about 4 years to train as a psychotherapist, not just a few 100 hours or so. They're expected every year to do CPD to improve their skills, change, and that does require the person that they're working with to engage in that change and to evolve as a person and to change their state of mind from something that is problematic for them to something that is, their desired end result, really. But none of us provide a cure, and none of us believe to provide a cure. So this is completely misleading. As I said before, this really seems like it's promoting coaching versus going to therapy for the everyday person. Schizophrenia and personality disorders are more on the extreme side of mental health. So when you have that at one end of the mental health spectrum and you've got everything below it, it really seems like everything below serious diagnosed mental health conditions should be with a coach. And this is just a complete inaccuracy and a misinformation of the mental health industry. This could produce harm in the future. If you were to, or anyone was to ever experience a complete severe mental health crisis, I'm saying just a crisis that you require more help for, you will have the wrong information and you may not necessarily go to a therapist, or you might have your own presumptions about what they provide. And I've experienced this. In my clinical practice, I've experienced people going to all sorts of professionals and feeling really, really hurt and disheartened. And people shut themselves off from accessing mental health support when they have had a bad experience. And that then causes further problems for them because they don't reach out for support. So this is why I believe that this is a really serious issue. It's a very serious issue that I find it so important to talk about. The other inaccuracy is that he mentions the use of the word patient when referring to therapists. Now, that's not true as well. As a therapist, I refer to the people that I work with as clients. I don't refer to them as patients, and most therapists don't either. Psychiatrists do because they are doctors, right? And they might also be detecting other physical symptoms, and therefore they will refer people to patients. But therapists do not. We don't refer to people as patients. And also through my...
Yeah, quick clarification on this. So the word patient originates from just saying a person who suffers. And as mental health treatment evolved, people decided to move away from the word patient to the word client because the word patient took on kind of like a more negative connotation. But there are actually still therapists that prefer the word patient, particularly psychodynamic therapists, because they believe the word client to be a lot more transactional. A client means a person that is paying you, whereas patient means a person who is suffering. And so for that reason, I would actually give a little bit of pushback on that. For instance, my own therapist, who is psychodynamic, she calls me her patient rather than client. It's not necessarily stigmatizing, it's just, different strokes for different folks.
My PhD research, I've read about how the different words impact the user experience. Like when we are called a patient, it seems like we are passive receivers of the help, and that can be seen, right, with mental health patients when they access pharmaceutical drugs via their psychiatrist, that they are just passive receivers. And client sounds like I'm paying for a service that I'm responsible to. And so the use of the language is very interesting, that he's used the word patient when referring to therapists, and clients when referring to coaches. But again, this is another inaccuracy.
So I'm not familiar with the particular study that she's referring to, but I can say, definitely when we study trends in science, it doesn't necessarily speak for everybody in that sample, and certainly not in the population as a whole. I personally don't find it problematic to call somebody a patient because, like I said, at its root, there's nothing stigmatizing about it. And I personally don't see it as like a passive thing like that. When I think of the word patient, I don't give it a connotation of like something passive where you receive a treatment rather than being an active participant in it. I think there's a good case to be made for both patient and client.
Is that following on from these definitions that he's misunderstood and he's misrepresented, but then he goes on to talk about coaching, he goes on to talk about the cognitive cycle and how there are negative thoughts and behaviors and feelings that one can generate from a belief. Now, this sounds like he's using a coaching tool. It's not really quite clear. He does refer to psychologists and cognitive behavioral experts, but what he hasn't made completely clear is that the model that he's talking about is actually from cognitive behavioral therapy.
Every day, you start to see the connection between your cognitive experiences, i.e. your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and your behavior. This is known as the cognitive cycle, which shows how you respond to situations in the context of your core beliefs.
Okay, it's not a model of his, but he doesn't reference this. And this is another issue of referencing that we see here. He hasn't referenced cognitive behavioral therapy. Aaron Beck, who was the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy in 1960.
I do agree that it's problematic and not that surprising at this point that he didn't reference CBT for this concept. I wouldn't go as far as to say that he should have cited Aaron Beck, because Aaron Beck primarily focused on the cognitive portion of cognitive behavioral therapy. There were plenty of other psychologists that contributed to the behavioral portion of CBT. He kind of like laid the foundation that other people then built on top of, but I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that you need to, cite Aaron Beck specifically.
Cognitive CBT therapy has been around for, like I said, decades. Really important to reference the founders of these models, okay? And it's really important that they themselves reference where they got the knowledge and information from, if they haven't. In conclusion, it's very important for those who would like to train in the area of psychology to find a robust training that doesn't make incorrect claims. I'm not saying that this course may not have helped individuals, because there may be some skills and tools in there that are helpful. I'm not saying that. All I'm simply saying is that there are some inaccuracies here, and it's potentially dangerous for misinformation to go out in the area of mental health. It is unethical and dangerous to work as a medical profession without having the correct training and credentials. So why is it not the case in the area of mental health, well-being, and life coaching and psychology? Because opening yourself up psychologically puts you in a very vulnerable position. Mental impressions from experiences can be lifelong. So you want to make sure that you're getting the support from a trustworthy person that has your best interest at heart.
Yeah, so while I try to sort of summarize my overall thoughts on this video, I would love if you could also give your thoughts. I fundamentally do not understand how coaching is different from therapy. Coaches don't always do everything that therapists do, but everything that coaches do, to my knowledge, can be done by a therapist. You go to a physician when you have an issue with the physical body. You go to a mental health professional like a therapist or a psychiatrist when you have an issue with a problem that arises in the mind. Problems that pertain to the emotional, the social, cognitive, the behavioral, the existential, all of these are problems that can be resolved through different types of psychotherapy. So I just kind of struggle to understand what exactly is not accounted for in therapy where coaches can come in. And again, that's not to say that some coaches aren't good at what they do, that they don't enact positive change in their clients' lives. I'm sure there are. I just don't understand what would motivate somebody who wants to do that kind of work to not go through the necessary steps to become a therapist. It seems a little bit like taking a shortcut to me. And something else that she didn't really touch on is this idea of like almost like an MLM coaching business where you have one head coach who coaches other coaches on how to be coaches, and then those coaches go out and coach other people. That to me is such an easy way to make passive money. I mean, passive for you, certainly not passive for the coaches who you trained to go on and provide the service. And there are even mental health professionals out there that do it. And I gotta tell you the truth, I give it a little bit of a side eye because to me personally, it just seems like a cash grab. So again, if I were to kind of summarize the points that came up in this, it's frustrating when people that aren't therapists comment on what therapy is. It's frustrating when people who haven't gone through the immense training that it takes to become a therapist take it upon themselves to perform the same functions as a therapist. It's misleading when people frame therapy as something very extreme in an effort to drive more sales to their own business. It's problematic when people don't give credit where credit is due. And just more broadly, I think it brings up this question of like, what is the role of coaching in this day and age? Is it time to finally set some regulations in place about what coaching can and cannot be? Because I gotta tell you, even if somebody has, an issue that maybe they don't need therapy for, they just have like a quick thing that they want to figure out, they go to a coach, everything's fine and dandy, and then bam, they get some sort of mental health crisis in the middle of it. It's that coach's responsibility to then refer them. And if that person had just gone to a therapist from the get-go who can perform the same function, they might not be in the position where they now need to be referred to a different specialist. They could be with somebody already that's able to help them through that crisis. Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you soon.